Good morning and welcome to the October Fire Chief's video message for October 2017. This month I have Michael Brady from Investigative Programs with me. Michael, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
So, the folks were wondering, what is Investigative Programs? The folks have asked, as we've done different station visits, how and what type of work activities are in your office. It's a lot of activities, from hiring, background, to interviewing, to access control and support of station activities. So can you give me a little overview of the areas that Investigative Programs is involved with?
Sure, Chief. So the Office of Investigative Programs consists of 3 full-time employees. So myself, and I'm the manager of the office. And then we have Mr. Raymond Wojcik, who focuses primarily as an internal affairs investigator, and then OSC Eunice Small, who handles a lot of the just day-to-day duties within the office.
Right, so obviously 3 people don't fill all the needs that the office has. How do you make the workload and the activities with just 3 people? How do you fill the gap?
So we also have 14 part-time employees who are our 14 background investigators, and they bring a diverse experience to us. We have 2 former FBI agents. We have several Maryland State Troopers who are there. We have a captain from the Alexandria Police Department who's there. And then we also have some people who have focused over the years through the Office of Personnel Management in background investigation. So they handle the day-to-day background investigation function. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Bill Henry and Lenny as well, Lenny Fitch.
Right. So as you say, the background process, as we'll talk about in a little bit, is very extensive, very much a process that gets us to good candidates, and it's both supporting both the career and the volunteer sides of our service. And we'll touch base on that. So what would the best way to describe the goals and mission of your office?
So we basically provide 3 main functions. So with the internal affairs function, the goal and mission of the internal affairs function is to conduct fair and impartial and thorough investigations when an allegation of misconduct is brought to the office. So we conduct the internal affairs investigation. So that's our main goal and mission on the internal affairs side, is to provide a comprehensive report to the Office of the Fire Chief. With the background investigation section, our goal is to ensure that the MCFRS standards are met and that we produce a thorough background investigative report so that the hiring panel can make an informed decision about whether they want to offer somebody a conditional offer of employment.
Right. And then lastly, through access control or photo IDs and department IDs, the Investigative Programs mission there is to support county security, or how would you best describe that?
So we work hand in hand with county security. We're one of the few departments within the county system that have the ability to produce our own access cards, to make replacement cards, to issue new cards to new employees. But there are some nuances there in that we can provide access levels to all stations, and we can also provide mostly student access to the new PSTA.
Right.
But there are some other factors that come in that we can talk about later as far as headquarters and CMF and those sorts of things. So
when you talk about the internal affairs or investigative process, give me a little snapshot for those within the department of how that works. How does information or a concern get to your office on 2 different regular paths?
Yes. So the 2 paths are internal complaints and external complaints. So for example, an internal complaint is strictly within the MCFRS department, that a complaint will come through the chain of command to your office, and then you will approve the Office of Investigative Programs through the Internal Affairs function to conduct an investigation. So the other route would be a external complaint. It can either be a partner of ours, a government partner, or it could be a private citizen, for example, who brings a complaint forward about the service that they received or some other allegation that they may forward. And that usually is routed through your office, and then we also receive the delegation of authority from you to conduct the investigation.
Exactly, because any activity of investigation or fact-finding that occurs does start through my office and lands with my request of yourself and Ray or to investigate it, to get into it and provide us information. And when you go through that, you're very much doing an administrative investigation, correct?
Yes.
And what's the differences there?
The difference between
administrative investigation and what people don't understand, that it's not involved in discipline. Your office is not.
Right. We conduct the investigation. Mm-hmm. So an administrative investigation, there's certain protocols, whether it's a career employee who's being investigated or a volunteer member who's being investigated. There's two different paths, but they're similar in that notifications must be made to the employee detailing the allegation against them, what representation the member is permitted to have during an interview, and those sorts of things. And then there's some timelines involved there.
Right, and then naturally, one of the things that people receive if they have been involved in one of your investigations is an acknowledgement form, the factor that identifies that this is an administrative process, and that information that's garnered within that is strictly used for the administrative activity. And that's something you cover very extensively when you start the process, correct?
Exactly. So the investigation starts with the delegation of authority from your office, and then the investigator will conduct whatever interviews he or she deems appropriate outside the scope of MCFRS. If we need to go and interview a citizen, obviously we don't serve them with a form that tells them to tell the truth and that it's an administrative investigation. But internally, within our members, they're served an investigation acknowledgement form, which advises them that it's an administrative investigation and that it's a compelled statement, but also a protected statement. So by a compelled statement, I mean that under the authority of the Office of the Fire Chief, that you're ordered to come to a designated place. Usually it's a mutually agreeable location, and an interview is conducted wherein you are ordered to tell the truth, but to submit to the interview.
And that's the most important component that can't be overstated enough times, is tell the truth. Identify the information, because as we get through our honesty and our integrity of our personnel of MCFRS is very much a high issue. And as we get through and as you get into that program, it's all about the most important point, having the member tell the truth, identify what they did and what they're aware of or what they know pertaining to the circumstance, and then let the investigative summary be developed. When you do that, you give the investigative summary back to my office.
Yes, sir.
And it's no point of your activities do you have a recommendation. Is that correct? How would you classify the basic 4 categories of investigative report?
So at the conclusion of an investigation, there's basically 4 findings of fact. One would be that the allegation is sustained, that the member engaged in the behavior which was alleged from the onset. Second would be non-sustained, that the department can neither prove nor disprove that the allegation or the misconduct occurred. So the other 2 would be exonerated, which means that our member did participate in the conduct that was brought to our attention, but that it was not against our policy or that it was lawful. And then the other one would be that it's unfounded. And usually unfounded is when somebody brings something to our attention and our involved member was never even at that location or was never on that apparatus, so it would be unfounded.
Right, so your investigative summaries are provided to me. That information is then looked at, and then if and when appropriate, it's provided to administrative services for administrative action, potentially disciplinary process. As well as it's provided a copy to the member saying you have been cleared of any concerns hereabouts, and you get a closure notice basically. as outlined through the CBAs,
Right.
For their abilities to understand that investigation has been closed. So that's the key components of the investigative process. Anything else that you want the folks to learn about investigative programs and internal affairs before we transition into background and other things within the office?
So the most important thing is a point that you brought up, and that concerns integrity and telling the truth. And integrity is one of those things that we all have, and only we can give it away. So to come into the investigative programs under the auspice of an internal affairs investigation, our hope is that our employees will walk through the door with their integrity intact, and after the interview still have that same integrity intact. So I would just like to reiterate, just to come in and tell the truth, and that will benefit not only the employee but the organization as well as the employee's family, because before I came over to MCFRS, I was employed with the Maryland State Police and did internal affairs work there too. And I know that these investigations can be stressful on the employee. And I know that can carry over into their home environment.
Right.
So just to put your mind at ease and just come in and tell the truth is the best course of action.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the other large chunk, as we talked about, that goes on a lot inside in investigative programs is the background process. What would you be able to categorize the steps, or how people go through the background process and how that works and what's involved?
Okay, so just to give you some rough numbers, is we background approximately 300 people for recruit class 41. So the steps of that are the people who are selected from the testing group based upon points or those sorts of issues that my office is not involved in. We're basically given a list of 300 people to background. So that starts out with a round of disqualifiers, in that within the organization we have our own disqualifiers. And we originally go through the disqualifiers with every packet. So we touch every packet before we ever meet the individual.
So when they came into the entrance exam test day, they had a set of completed paperwork.
Yes, sir.
They put those in an envelope. Those envelopes were then held and sealed. And then after that list of 300 is completed, you then get those 300 envelopes.
Right.
And you start that process there. And that's where you get to your disqualifiers at that point, right?
Yes, that is the first round of disqualifications.
Right.
And that usually takes about 2 or 3 days with a team of investigators who actually review every background packet that's provided to us after the testing cycle.
So now after they've gotten through that step in the disqualifiers, where's the next movement?
Yeah, so then backgrounds are assigned to investigators. Each investigator typically carries a caseload of between 5 to 8 at any one time. We'd like to get backgrounds turned around in 45 days. And they're very thorough backgrounds. We maintain the same standards as the Montgomery County Police Department. We have a very thorough employment history that we conduct, as well as a criminal history and also a driving history, as well as checking with references and family members for any domestic violence issues or anything that
and every
wasn't
candidate
discovered.
comes in for a face-to-face interview?
Yes, sir.
With the background investigator?
Yes. So the background interview typically lasts over an hour. It's a very thorough interview. It's not a 5 or 10 minute interview. And we also fingerprint our prospective members, and those prints are run through not only the state of Maryland but also the FBI. So then we'll get a return usually within 24 hours.
Right. So after that, the background process is wrapped up, and that is another component that's put into the hiring panel. The hiring panel takes CPAT, takes the medical evaluation through FROMS, takes the interview panel information as well as the background information, and uses that as an aggregate, as different factors to use in the hiring panel.
Yes, sir. Yep. The written test score is very important, as well as the oral interview score, and obviously successfully completing CPAT. And then the background investigation is a very thorough report. It's about a 7-page report that is then provided to the hiring panel, and then the hiring panel reviews all those functions and
Right.
makes a decision.
Right. So that's the thing. And when you look at the background processes that you have been involved with, right about 2 years now, the frequency by which we get folks that automatically hit those disqualifiers is shocking.
Yes, sir.
And it is a pure statement that there's a lot of good candidates out there, but there's also things that people have that make them, lacking the good qualifications to be an MCFRS member. And that's something that is a thorough steps that get accomplished through the background process. So I appreciate all that your team and yourself do to do that, because it is quite lengthy and arduous for sure.
Thank you.
So as it relates to both background, but more specifically to investigative programs and internal affairs, one of the things that I forgot to hit on a second ago is what's the separation, or what's the difference between what your office does and Captain Kennedy and EEO office? You're all at the same facility at Dover Road, but what's the difference between the two?
Excellent question. And so basically the EEO office, Captain Kennedy and Lieutenant Smith and Captain DeMent, and also everybody else who serves in the EEO office, they focus on the workplace and employment discrimination and harassment. So oftentimes that can be a misunderstanding or a clarification that needs to be made as far as a policy or a procedure, or just something that maybe the employees could work out themselves as far as something that's going on in the work environment. That's not to say that that may never make it over to the internal affairs side of investigative programs. If it is a misconduct case, it will, as far as discrimination or harassment, and then we'll conduct an internal investigation that may or may not result in some disciplinary action being taken by the department.
Okay, and again, there's clear break between the two, and while supportive, there are definitely different functions and roles.
Yes,
no doubt.
Yes, and it's important to note that even though we are in the same facility, for the department to know, we do not discuss cases, we do not discuss anything. There's a lot of confidentiality.
Absolutely, and definitely a part that needs to be key, and the backbone within each of those offices is the confidentiality. Lastly, throughout the investigative programs office, we talked about access control and badges. One of the elements that relates to our organization is, as we did here today, to get into the executive office building, swipe card. As you go to the academy, as you go to headquarters, as you go to CMF, as you go to Dover Road, as you were mentioning, all of those are proximity card, access. How does someone who needs to get access to one of those buildings, how do they go about, doing that? And how do they go about getting a new card?
Okay, so when we onboard new employees, a new card is usually made by county security at orientation. For example, a civilian employee. On a Monday, they will attend their orientation. At that time, county security will take their photograph and then develop what we call a profile. In other words, your name, where you're going to be employed, and those sorts of things. And then that profile is uploaded, and then we will, over in investigative programs, produce the actual access card, the MCFRS access card. We can provide them access to all stations, and like I said, limited access over at PSTA, but then through their facilities manager, which is typically an assistant chief, they can get their further access to either CMF or PSHQ or an off-site or a joint facility.
Right. The other thing is how does a new volunteer get an access card, and how does that differ from what you just explained?
So all volunteer access cards go through the Division of Volunteer Services, so that would be Ruthie. So they would get in touch with Ruthie, and she will take their photograph, and then what she does is she will transfer that data over to us, and OSC Unismall will then make their access cards. We tend to do those in bunches because they process them in bunches. So if a volunteer gets their photograph taken on a Monday, it might take a week or two for them to actually get the access card in their hand, and all that gets returned through the Division of Volunteer Services, and they distribute the card.
Right, because as you identified, Ruthie takes a picture when she brings the person in traditionally for that fingerprinting activity,
right?
And then as that member processes through the application and the process to go through FROMs and as such, then they get transitioned into your office to get a card generated, because as we well know, every class at the academy for a new member requires a access card to obtain.
Right. Yes, sir.
So it's actually Una Small at your office is the person who people reach out to for a broken card or replacement card.
Yes, OSC Unismall would be the point of contact for any access card issues.
Okay. So when we talk about investigative programs, did we cover everything that's in your office?
We did. I believe we did.
Anything you need to add? Anything you want to add to?
We perform some ancillary duties, in that we also process all automated speed citations and red light citations. That can be somewhat of a time-consuming task, but Investigator Wojcik primarily handles that function.
And for those that don't see them, and I would describe that most of the 70 or 80% of the citations you do get, the members, the people within the stations don't see.
Right.
Having done that many years ago, some of those citations are very clear, which apparatus it is, and the fact that the warning equipment was on. Ray then looks at it and gets the CAD record and matches it up, and then administratively requests it to be closed. Naturally, some of these occurrences are not on responding vehicles, and some of these occurrences are on vehicles that are reserve or support vehicles with unknown drivers, and that takes a step or two for you and Ray and a couple of the executive chiefs to figure out who had that vehicle and who was driving it at that time, and then be able to figure out if it was on a call and it just wasn't the warning equipment didn't get captured to be on. So there's no doubt that automated enforcement is a step that does require some background and some investigative work to figure out those steps involved, and it's something that's become much more prevalent over the last decade or so.
Right. Yes, sir.
So, okay. Anything else with the investigative programs office?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so clearly there's a lot going on. There's a lot of activity between recruit class hiring as we switch to ideally a annual hiring process, or more specifically an annual entrance exam,
right,
which will get us into a more cycle of background process. Smaller cycle ideally, or smaller groups, because we'll have an annual exam process. You won't have 1,300 people pass the exam and then have to look at those packets and numbers of folders. So that'll be a goal of having an adjustment there. But as the organization of 2,700 or 3,000 folks, there's a lot of work involved in supporting the background hiring, as well as the maintenance of effort and the investigative programs within our organization. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So from the fire chief's office, the role of what the investigative programs is engaged with, hopefully this video was helpful, gave you some additional points. As we said, if you have a question, reach out to Michael. If you have a need for access control, reach out to that assistant chief. Or need for a card, reach out to Miss Small at Dover Road to get a replacement card. It's October. The weather's starting to break. We've just finished up the Fire Prevention Week for this year. Another great cycle of open houses and community engagement activities. Ensure that you're checking that smoke detector at every chance you can, on every call where possible and practical. And until next time, take care, be safe.